Council, District 2. I'm the chair of this committee. I'm joined by my colleague, City Councilor Matt O'Malley, and City Council President Andrea Campbell. I want to remind you that this is a public hearing. It is being recorded. It will be broadcast on Comcast 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964, and online. At this time, please silence your cell phone and other devices. We will also take public testimony and would appreciate it if you would sign in and check off the box to testify. Please state your name and affiliation, residence, and limit your comments to a few minutes to ensure all comments and concerns can be heard. Today's hearing is on docket number 0583. In order for a hearing regarding vacant properties in the City of Boston, and docket number 0316, order for a hearing to discuss strategies to reduce and activate vacant residential properties in the City of Boston. This is the City Council Committee on City, Neighborhood Services, and Veterans and Military Affairs. It's a joint hearing along with the Committee on Housing and Community Development. At this time, I would like to ask my colleague, City Council President Andrea Campbell, if you would like to offer an opening statement.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn, and also thank you to Councillor Edwards for jointly hosting these two dockets. We're trying to be extremely efficient on our side, so thank you very much, and thank you to Central Staff and Shane as well. And thank you, of course, to Councilor O'Malley for partnering in this discussion. We continued or started this conversation last year, I believe in April of last year, and it continues as we focus on ways in which to reduce the number of blighted properties or vacant lots that are both city or publicly owned, as well as those that are privately owned, both from the residential parcels as well as commercial. I've taken the lead more on the residential parcels and Councilor O'Malley on the commercial, but both are equally, of course, important. And since the conversation last year, where we learned that, for example, there were over 1,000 D&D or city-owned parcels, we decided from my space in my office to focus on the city-owned residential parcels. When you pulled that number apart, many were in my district, which is largely Dorchester, Mattapan, Jamaica Plain, and Rosendale, in the hundreds. And we had some conversations with Chief Dillon and her incredible team about ways to activate these spaces. And the beautiful thing about starting a hearing and turning it into subsequent conversations and continuing to go with the flow is we were able to partner with Wentworth Institute on an incredible project called Reclaiming Space. It was absolutely free in the sense that the City of Boston and taxpayers paid $0. It was Wentworth in the Kingdom of Netherlands, based on some work in Amsterdam and activating spaces that put up the resources for this event. And it was a group of students and alum and professors, along with residents who live near these vacant lots, who live in my district, who came together to brainstorm ways in which to activate these spaces. And out of that, we produced some incredible ideas for some lots that were city-owned, some that were privately owned. Wentworth decided to continue that partnership and to have a couple of, class run some feasibility studies on some of those ideas. And so my goal is to continue to find partners, not only through the city, but those who work in our city institutions, great institutions that are in our city, to activate these residential lots. And I'll just say, I want to thank Chief Dillon in particular and her team as we've rolled up our sleeves to really find ways to make sure that all of these lots are brightening up a community, adding value to a community, and making sure that the lots are all going to be activated with community-driven ideas and purpose, which is really important. It doesn't happen without partnership, so I want to thank the administration and Chief Dillon and her team for the partnership. I also want to thank Wentworth, of course, who will speak on our second panel for the partnership, as well as all of our residents who continue to show up to be a part of this conversation, engaged. It is a hot topic. For a while, it wasn't getting any attention whatsoever. But now people are recognizing that with the housing crisis, or just the fact that we want the city to feel prosperous and beautiful to everyone, that there's a lot of great things we can do in this regard. So I'm actually happy to see that there's some level of attention even on what was a topic that me and O'Malley thought was quite remarkable, and maybe I'll put this in quotes, sexy to talk about. So we're happy to see that more folks are coming to the table to be a part of the solutions. So thank you very much for the partnership. Looking forward to the conversation around further ways to activate these lots, but also on the privately owned, which are much more challenging to deal with, looking at possible tools that we could be thinking about to incentivize privately owned parcels and landowners to do something with properties that continue to either be a problem property for the city of Boston or property that is not showing up in a way in which a community or neighbors would like to see. So thank you, and again, thank you to Councilor O'Malley for the partnership. Thank you, Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Council President. And before I introduce Councilor O'Malley, I would like to thank the administration for being here, for testifying, for Sheila Dillon, Chief of Housing, Andrew Grace, Director of Economic and Strategic Planning, Chris English, Properties Task Force, and Chief Jerome Smith from Neighborhood Services. At this time, I would like to ask Councilor O'Malley for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this expedited hearing. Thank you, of course, to the Council President for her incredible leadership and partnership in this. Thank you to the Mayor Walsh's administration. I know these are issues that the Mayor takes very seriously and is looking to address it. In many ways, this seems somewhat counterintuitive. The real estate market in Boston has never been hotter. As it relates to residential, we need to build more housing. There's no doubt about it. As it relates to commercial, admittedly, many people are using bricks and mortar stores less frequently than they did because of online commerce, but still, the economy is thriving. It seems odd that we are seeing vacant storefronts, vacant properties, vacant high-end, the so-called high-end blight, vacant condos, but it really sort of underscores two things. One, because the real estate market is so strong, foreign investment certainly plays a role in it. Secondly, and we have all seen this, and the Chief and I have had to deal with this, there are, and both Chiefs know this, there are certain developers in neighborhoods who let a place remain vacant and empty and overgrown so that they can then use that as a bargaining chip with the neighbors to get more variances to build more, which is not a good practice and something we all frown upon. Yep. And then as it relates to commercial, there are owners of businesses that leave it vacant because they know there are certain businesses, particularly certain emerging industries, that will command higher rents for the owner or for the landlord, and it also could serve as a tax incentive to keep it vacant. So what can we do? Working with the Council President, we first had our hearing last summer. It was a 3-hour hearing. All of you participated. It was very well done. Since then, we've been working with everyone on the panel, as well as Chief Barrows, to look at what some opportunities that other cities have done. Many have used a vacancy fee, particularly as it relates to commercial, and something I think we need to have on the table. I'm not looking to be overly onerous, but certainly it's a tool that we ought to look at. Other things we can get, hopefully, from this hearing is having a better registry, working with folks, looking at some best practices at other cities, in, not only throughout New England or throughout the country, but even internationally. A lot of major cities such as Boston are dealing with this. So look forward to the continued work, the continued partnership. Thank you all for your great work in this space, and thank you for your partnership, Mr. Chairman and Madam President.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley, and thank you, Council President. At this time, I'd like to invite the administration to testify. Do you want to start, Sheila?
I will. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Flynn and other members that are here. And I share your interest in activating all storefronts and all vacant land in the city of Boston. I do want to give some stats that I put together this morning to tell the committee and also tell the general public where we are with the disposition of properties. So when the Walsh administration came into office, it was a very clear mandate that we were sitting on too much property. We couldn't agree more, so we started working in earnest to dispose of city-owned property. And since 2014, we have sold or designated developer for over 3 million square feet of land, which is fabulous, in 37 vacant buildings. We don't get vacant buildings as much in a hot market because they can be sold for the back taxes. But the 3 million square feet have allowed us to create 1,600 new units of housing, 70% of which are below market and deed restricted. So 3 million square feet, 1,600 new units of housing. In addition, we've been able to create 17 new parks, general passive parks, and 17 new community gardens. So that is a great down payment on the work that needs to continue. But I thought those numbers made me feel very good this morning. When I looked at them, I said, wow, we have been busy working with you all, working with your offices, and we have accomplished a lot together. The work certainly does continue, as I mentioned. We currently own 1,176 parcels of land. Many of those parcels of land, because we're down to what's not as desirable, are remnants. But of these, 434 of these parcels are in a disposition process, means that we've started conversations with the community, or we've drafted an RFP and that is out, or we've selected a developer and they're lining up their financing. So 434 of those are in a disposition process. 412 are unavailable or not because they're urban wilds. We would never build on them. They are part of our tree canopy and our wildlife, or they are located in the Grove. And Councillor O'Malley would certainly understand the Grove. We don't know what to do with the Grove. It's 270 parcels of land. It doesn't have the right infrastructure to build. In order to get the right infrastructure, we'd have to take a lot of land by eminent domain. But we're continuing to work and with the community and others to think about solutions. But 412 are unavailable. And that leaves 249 that we are starting to research, look at, understand better, and 81 that we have put out in the past and haven't had any takers. So I do feel like we've got a good handle on the inventory. Now we just need to continue the work and expedite. Our goal certainly is not to own any land, or once we get land through surplusing or tax taking, that it goes right back out on the street. And that's where we hope to be in a matter of years. I also just want to mention very quickly that every year we do a distressed building report. I think I mentioned it at the last City Council hearing as well. And we started surveying empty buildings, vacant buildings that were distressed. And this work started in 1997. People drive around, they really get water and sewer shut-off notices, and they've got a methodology, and they look at each building. And in 2018, the last year that we have information for, there were 381 distressed buildings. That's less than 1% of our total number of properties, but still. And of the 381, 213 were residential. So after the survey's done, we mail to the owner, we make ourselves available. Sometimes people call and they're stuck and they need work at ISD, or they're looking for financing, or the building wasn't vacant, but someone is living there and needs a lot of help with their home. We also notify ISD if we think we see something that's unsafe, and we list the report on the website in case developers want to avail themselves of this list, hopefully not taking advantage of anyone. So we do have a pretty good sense of vacant and distressed properties in the neighborhood. And then finally, and I'm not the expert, and many of you worked on this, we do feel like a lot of the vacant units that were taken off through the Airbnb process, because of the past ordinance, because of the great work the City Council and staff, Chris English is to my right, have done, we are going to see a lot of vacant units that were being rented out as whole units come back on the market in December. I am not the expert. Chris is here to answer any questions. So in summary, city-owned property, land and buildings, we're working really hard to dispose of them. We're having some success. We want to do more. We'll continue to monitor the situation in our neighborhoods, and hopefully the change in the Airbnb law and guidelines will bring a lot of vacant units back into the market. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Smith?
Thank you, councilors. I appreciate the fact of being invited down here. Again, my name is Jerome Smith. I'm here with the hat of being the Director of Neighborhood Services and also the Chair of the Mayor's Problem Property Task Force. So I appreciate being down here because I believe that the two orders sum up a lot of concern that I see day to day in my job out in the communities when you talk to regular residents, both with the residential lots. There are a lot of residential lots that are not city-owned properties, and I think, Madam President, you know that we've worked very closely with you on a couple problem properties in your district that have been problems for a long time, and they get off the list and they go back on the list and get off. And so, you know, the difficulty that we have dealing with the problem properties that are of private nature, I think that we've talked about working on to get better tools to make sure that we can get at what we currently do with the Problem Property Task Force. But the positive thing that we have is that the council supported the administration in the creating of the Make Boston Shine Trust. And so what we do is we have a great partner in the Department of Neighborhood Development with Donald Wright, where we sit and we look at available lots. And the chief from housing had mentioned about the public gardens and community gardens that we have been able to turn some of these lots over. So we give stipends to communities to kind of retake and reposition lots of land that we identify through our department. Some have already been out in RFP, and the community says, we want economic development, we want housing on that lot. That's set over there. Parcels that have not been deemed that by the community yet, we work with Donald and they identify those, and then we go out to the community and say, what would you think about us working with Kabloom and building a playground in this area? We've done it twice now in Roxbury and once in Dorchester. So we find that the opportunity for us to think of new things to do with our land is very important, and we have a great partner in D&D in getting some of those things accomplished. But I think that it's great the work that you did with Wentworth. I was aware of that work. We are also currently speaking with Northeastern to kind of talk about problem properties and what is the genesis of a problem property. How does a property become a problem? And so, Madam President, I think that it's timely that the work that you've done with Wentworth and tying into the work that Chris and I are going to be doing with Northeastern, I think that we're going to have some valuable information. Hopefully it comes from all this about how we can move forward. And then the council made it for the commercial vacancies. I would really love to find a solution, and I agree with you. Whether you're going down Boylston Street between the Arlington and Berkeley block of Boylston Street, one of our main shopping districts, and see the vacancies that are sitting there, and I agree with you. I think there's individuals who are just sitting on their properties and are charging enormous amounts of money, and nobody can ever actually go into that property, but they're not realizing the broken tooth thing that they're doing. Down to Center Street and West Roxbury, Center Street and JP with the vacancies, where the vacancies in neighborhoods like that can actually decay a Main Street district. And, you know, we have to talk about the challenges of our Main Streets programs encouraging businesses to come into the area. We have to talk to residents about what they will actually support. A lot of people want to open a coffee shop or a restaurant. Well, maybe the neighborhood doesn't want to, or the neighborhood doesn't invest in that business, and the business goes up. And then now that once vacant spot was full with the business, now it's vacant again because it didn't have that kind of community buy-in. Madam President, I know you have the issue with Popeyes in Common Square. Nobody wants the Popeyes in Common Square. They actually want some other options. And so I think this is a catalyst for us to have a conversation about how we leverage our Main Streets districts, how we leverage all these other players who are managing these properties to actually go out and talk to residents about what they want to see in their commercial districts, because that's how you'll get a successful business. When the community says, we want these types of businesses in here, we will support them, and then they come in, and then they'll thrive. And so I think this is a timely conversation. I appreciate the time coming down here to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Mr. Grace or Mr. English?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Then I'll go. Excuse me, Madam Chairman, Councilor Flynn, and Councilor O'Malley. Oops, okay, it's on. Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Grace. I'm the Director of Economic and Strategic Planning in the Mayor's Office of Economic Development. Chief Barros sends his regrets that he's not able to be here, as well as Natalia Urtubey, who's our Director of Small Business, is unable to be here today. First and foremost, OED, the Office of Economic Development, appreciates the Council's focus on this important community economic development issue facing the city. We are committed to continuing to work with the Council and the city departments to develop policies and solutions to this issue. OED is working closely with our partners here today, D&D and the Problem Properties Task Force, as well as the BPDA, the Mayor's Office, and other departments. There are a confluence of factors that have created the situation we're in today. This isn't just a Boston problem, it's also a national problem. Vacant storefront properties are complex with many layers to it. Some of these complexities include, and they've been mentioned earlier, geography, downtown versus the neighborhoods and the distinctions between them, shifts in the retail industry, the online economy, economic factors, how leases are valued, subscription models for certain types of retailers and the incentives that come along with that, who's present in the market at any given time and the dynamics of that market, and of course, as was alluded to before, tax codes and incentives in the tax codes as it relates to vacancy and some of the incentives for keeping things vacant. I'll address briefly what OED is currently doing with regards to commercial space vacancies throughout the city, which we've broken down as we look at the problem into 4 categories. I'll also address some of the challenges that exist in each of the 4 categories. The 4 commercial space vacancy categories are, as we've organized them, new development or new inventory, which is about to come on board. The second one is storefronts that are empty now, leases that have recently expired, tenants decided not to renew, or businesses have closed, as Jerome was referencing. The third category, retail space where the landlord is actively displacing tenants for a whole host of reasons. And the fourth category is empty buildings, blighted properties. Category number 1, new development. OED is working closely with the Boston Planning and Development Agency to intervene at the Article 80 stage to collect accurate data around what's coming online and align that with what the needs are in the respective community. BPDA and OED staff have been developing relationships with commercial real estate brokers, and this is where the geography comes in because not all commercial real estate brokers work in all the neighborhoods. Brokers represent the downtown markets pretty adequately, but they're not as present or available in the neighborhoods. We do have very good data when it comes to the inventory that's coming online. Next in this category, OED is working with BPDA to create opportunities for small businesses to connect with under construction and recently completed commercial retail space in mixed-use developments. So we're chipping away at that. Category number 2, storefronts and buildings that are empty now. We're doing a bunch of things in this category. As part of the Economic Development Center, we held a 7-week series in April to May of 2019 called Business 101 Commercial Space. We're going to repeat this series in February of 2020. The topics for this series included lease negotiations, finding the right space, permitting and licensing, business operations, how to market your business, access to capital, and it culminated in a vacant space fair that was held at Perkins Community Center in Codman Square. At this event, over 80 small business attendees were present, and 14 property owners displayed vacancies in properties. It was a matchmaking event, and we plan on doing more of those. We are also working on getting better data in this category. See a theme here. There's a clear need for this better data. A lot of what's out there is anecdotal and narrative, which isn't enough to create the policy I think that we all are very interested in working on. To this extent, both OED, Small Business Unit, and the BPDA research teams are collaborating with Boston University's SPARK program on 2 related projects. The data that's out there now, the Dun & Bradstreet or the CoStar data, is imperfect. It's incomplete. It focuses on those downtown properties and not so much the neighborhoods. With Spark, BPDA is piloting a scrubbing of different data sets, not the Dun & Bradstreets or the CoStars, but really working with Google and Yelp APIs to kind of scrub that data, develop some algorithms around code, and identify and eliminate redundancies in that data so that we have a better data set around what those neighborhood businesses are. From there, we can extrapolate and do more with it. This has been going on now for about 6 months. We're about another month away from having a good set of data and code that we can then hopefully apply this to other neighborhoods in the city. The OED Small Business Unit is also working with Spark in using mapping technology to detect vacancies in real time and collect this data in low and moderate income neighborhoods. And this is in addition to the data that we've been collecting in main streets, this is the stuff that's not in the main streets where we're working on collecting that stuff. We're still fine-tuning it. The goal with this is to understand where businesses are closing and storefronts are vacant, and to seek to understand patterns that may help the city predict and prevent, hopefully, businesses from closing in the future. The third category, retail space where landlord is actively displacing tenants. Over the past couple months, OED and other city departments have been working with one Dudley Square property owner in particular who was evicting, say, between 13 and 18 businesses from a property. We brought to the table technical assistance and are working closely. Now 7 leases have been signed as a result of that technical assistance resource, and more in the works as an ongoing. I'm not going to get into all the details. And there certainly are other folks in the room who can speak to the specifics of that. We continue to engage and work with those businesses and that property owner. And the last category, empty buildings, blighted properties. I believe, as was referenced previously, the work in Upham's Corner. If you aren't familiar with our work around activating empty buildings, we've been, OED, Arts and Culture, D&D, and BPDA have been working closely with a couple different entities. One is Now and There, a nonprofit, and a artist called Nick Cave to bring the Joy Project to the former Bank of America branch. It's an empty building that the city owns. So we needed to step up to the plate and do something there. It's a terrific project. There was a parade that went from South End all the way to Upham's Corner. It is an installation that's in place for the next 6 months, I believe through April of 2020. It's wrapped in a collage that the community made, and there's inflatable balloons that come out of it. It's creative, inventive, kind of fun ideas trying to activate this empty asset. And a smaller example in Downtown Crossing, the BPDA has created a storefront in an empty storefront that promotes the work and tries to get people to engage in the work regarding the downtown planning study. Small sample of things. We recognize this is a serious and complex issue and are continuing to approach this from a number of different angles with external and internal stakeholders, including the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris English?
Councilors, thanks for having me. Chris English, the Office of Intergovernmental Relations. I think Chief Smith and Dylan and Andrew have pretty much covered a lot of the work that's going on now, but I'm happy to answer any questions or provide any additional insight that you might have.
Thank you. Thank you to the panelists for your work on this important issue. Chief Dillon, I know we worked on an issue where a while back a hairstylist in Chinatown was potentially being evicted due to the rent increase in his small business, and I know your office, the mayor's office, was very helpful in working with this hairstylist so we could stay in there. I'm just thinking, Chief, with all the development taking place in various neighborhoods, is it likely that we're going to see more kind of neighborhood stores or neighborhood businesses, the prices of their lease going up? And what can we do short-term and long-term on helping these businesses, small businesses, stay in the city?
Sure. I can certainly start, and then maybe Andrew has more to add. But yeah, I do remember that case well, and your office was very helpful and instrumental in making sure that the owner kept the hairdresser in place. But that was a situation where someone came in, bought the building. The commercial tenant did have a lease. We just had to all put some pressure on for the owner to honor that lease. And they were trying to evict for a very small infraction. I think that speaks to, it's so important that when commercial businesses take a new lease, that take a new space, that they have very long-term leases with the option to renew. But you're right to raise it as an issue. A lot of buildings are being bought and sold in a hot economy, and oftentimes the losers are the commercial businesses. We now have put into all of our funding RFPs that we won't fund any any new development that has potentially or could potentially displace an existing commercial business or residence. So someone would have to, if they come in and they say, oh, well, we're going to build 40 new units of affordable housing, if there's a grocer on the first floor or 6 tenants above, we're going to have a long conversation about how those people can stay in the new development or what will happen to them during the construction. So we're writing it into our RFPs. And I know it's a little trickier with market rate developments or just market rate transactions, but I know that the BPDA is also having conversations with new developers if they're looking at developing a site where existing businesses are in place. And the conversations are much more robust than they ever have been, and we're really seeking answers from developers on how we're going to make sure that no one is harmed in the development.
Yes, sir.
I think Sheila
Okay.
covered it. Yeah.
And then my final question before I open it up to my colleagues. Can you talk about some of the vacant properties that we see in the city? What is the impact that some of these owners might not be or may be behind in their taxes, on their property taxes? And what type of programs are available to work with them, maybe to get them back on track so that they can hopefully open up a business again, but also to address their outstanding tax liability?
I know that the Age Strong office, and you probably refer people with back taxes, as taxes increase, and it's no fault of the city, the tax rate is set by the state. And there is a lot of programs and a lot of angst around making sure that elderly people never lose their home to back taxes. So the Age Strong, our office, we're all fielding those calls and working with assessing, and assessing's been really quite wonderful, working with elders and seniors in our city to make sure that no one has to sell their home because of back taxes. In addition to that, it is hard when taxes are owed because, we have to follow state law about getting back taxes. If it's an affordable housing project or something that we have financed, we can certainly work with the owner to restructure the deal, allowing them to get more cash flow, allowing them to get more income so that they can pay back taxes. But if it's a straight market rate commercial property or residential property, the owner does need to pay their taxes. Certainly, assessing has been very, very good, I think, in this climate, especially about setting up payment plans, taking deposits, working with owners. No one wants to foreclose on a business or a residential owner for back taxes. So assessing really is doing all they can to set up, viable payment plans.
Thank you, Chief. At this time, Council President, would you like to open it up for questions?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Flynn, and thank you to the panelists for the updates, which are updates from, of course, what we learned in the first hearing. So thank you all for the work you're doing. I want to, I think, spend some time, and I'll take a few minutes before turning it over to Councilor O'Malley, and then we can sort of go back and forth, to really focus on the tools in our toolboxes, right, to address the issues that we all are concerned about, whether they're privately owned or publicly owned parcels, commercial, residential. What do we currently have in our toolbox that, particularly, I guess, for privately owned, because the other obviously is within our control, but that incentivizes bad players, bad actors, to sort of step it up. And I'll sort of name a few that came up in the conversation since last year. One was the Clean It and Lean It program. I've talked to various folks, including in Public Works, about that. I think it was a program that was partially state funded and partially D&D funded. Would love to hear sort of an update on where that is, if there's data even available from that program on its effectiveness or not. And then the second, and then I could go to some of the other ideas, is the task force, the Problem Properties Task Force itself. We have, of course, with both you, Jerome, and Chris, gone back and forth on specific properties that are problematic. We've talked about the challenge in getting those properties listed as a problem property, all that you have to do. We've had conversations offline about some changes we could possibly make to the ordinance, which I'd love to hear more about today, just to make it easier for folks to complain about something and get that property immediately listed in a shorter time frame than currently happens. And then once a property is actually listed, then what happens? And I use one example, the famous Philbrick example in the Rosendale section of my district that I've known about since a candidate for office. And I know everyone on that street, they are amazing people. But a property that is troublesome for so many reasons. But a follow-up meeting after it was actually listed, then the question became, well, what now happens? Are there things that automatically are triggered that will penalize an owner to do something, or do we have to then take some additional steps? What's the value of being on the problem properties task force list? So Clean It and Lean It Problem Properties Task Force, I think, are current or past tools. Would love to hear a little bit more about that. And from anybody, I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. So you grabbed in two topics that are actually things that I've spoken about repeatedly, and I know that I've worked with Chief Dillon on, Chief Dillon is on the problem properties task force, but she and I have spoken about Clean It or Lean It. Clean It or Lean It was a program that had previously been in place. It has been a few years since it's been in place, but I think it's something that Sheila and I have talked about, where residents had become comfortable with the fact of the city would come out, clean up a property, board it up, take care of it, and then we put a lien on the property. There was a time period, and I'm not sure when, where the previous administration, we kind of stopped doing that so much, and we went to like a different route. And this administration, we just haven't gotten back to Clean It or Lean It. We do send ISD out, they do shore up buildings. As far as an official policy of Clean It or Lean It, I think Sheila and I have talked about how do we bring it back because of the fact that there was some value in it. And residents have actually, you hear any resident, they say Clean It or Lean It, like instantly off the top of their head. And so Sheila and I have talked repeatedly about how do we get that program back, but not just the way that it was done in the past, but look at how we are actually handling things currently and how we can actually do it better. So that we would be more than happy, I think, to sit down and talk with you about, because it's something that we actually want to do.
That's great.
For problem properties, it's a little different. The ordinance is very specific. It is, to be the most basic, it is a problem property is a public nuisance that has 4 911 calls or 4 outstanding code enforcement violation tickets. It has to meet that threshold. And so what I think the public, I think it's just an understanding of what the ordinance is for the public. I think we have to do a better job talking about it, because a property that will have loud parties and loud music a couple nights, unless the residents have called in and hit that 4 911 calls, I can't deem it a problem property, right? Because the way the ordinance is written, it has to be 911 calls. And so what happens is with the police department is residents know their CSOs, a resident knows the officer, and so the resident will call the officer that they know, and the officer send the car out, like a code 19. That doesn't count. Code 19s don't count. It has to be a 911 call. So it's hard for me as an administrator to talk to that poor resident on the phone who has just had their wits end with the property, and I have to say to them, you have to call 911. It's just a frustrating point. And I think that that's an education tool that we just have to do a better job of educating the public about what the requirements are for a problem property. I truly believe that there are more problem properties in the city of Boston than there are currently on the mayor's problem property task force list. We have spent, I would say, the past year having a discussion about what is the true feeder system of the problem property task force. We have now identified it between the work that Sheila Dillon and her team does with the distressed properties, with ISD and the work that they do, with the police department with the work that they do. We have in BHA, who has a lot of tenants who are in some of these buildings. So what we've done now is I have sat with them to discuss how we feed that to the task force, and now it's becoming a little bit more fluid. We also, Counselor, I think that you were the one that out of the council that avails yourself to this the most of the task force, but we've actually now are grateful that more counselors are stepping up and identifying problem properties. And so I think that the more that we create opportunities for individuals to feed to the task force, the more that we can handle. I think that there's also conversations about creating an online portal for residents to report on their own. Sometimes residents are fear calling 311 or 911 because they're afraid that police officer will show up at that house and say, your tenant next door called. So providing them an opportunity maybe to put a property on the task force through the website, because regardless of what's going on, if it hits the 3 or hits the 4 code enforcement, it hits the 4 911 calls, we can deem it. Once it's deemed, to your question, there's a couple difficulties, as I explained to you, about getting something onto the task force. The way the ordinance is written, they have to be served by certified mail. And so what happens more often is, Madam President, like you would give us an address, we would certify mail, the person lives in Florida. I keep getting the returned letters from the address that we have on file in Florida. That property, while we have identified it as a problem property, is not deemed legally a problem property because that person has not been officially been served. So what we've done to take a step to that is that we now have ISD constables go out and hand deliver problem property letters to building owners in Massachusetts. So we've actually have gone to other towns and served people at their door. It's just another layer because it was to get at that backlog of us repeatedly sending a notice to somebody, and then the residents or the counselors are saying, Jerome, where's this problem property? Why is it taking so long? It literally is the serving of the document and the problem nature that we have with actually getting that into somebody's hands. And so that is one thing that I think that we would look to work with the council on to try to address. The ability of notifying the property owner that they have been deemed a problem property. We should look at the ordinance and figure out a way to make it a little easier. So once it's on the problem property task force, and say, for an example, 123 Washington Street has been labeled on the problem property task force, they have 3 open code violations. After a certain grace period of the code violations, we can then hit the building up to $300 a day per violation, up to. So that's not automatically $300 a day. I think that, as you guys can see, can ratchet up a number pretty quickly. So we have technically done smaller increments of $25 to $50 a day. We had one property in Roxbury that quickly went up to $978,000 that we assessed onto the property. It's worth much more than the property itself is worth. It caught the attention of the bank. The building had fallen into foreclosure and the bank had it. Once we deemed that large number and sent it to the bank then reached out to us and said, we want to rectify this. We're selling the building. Here's the new building owners. We then went through a process to check in with the new building owners, explain to them the problems that the previous tenant had with the previous owner had with the building. They've rectified that situation, and then we work with them to resolve that number. And so that, in the essence, is the way that a nice project goes from a problem property all the way through. If it is a police action, 911 calls is the reason why. It's another thing. It's at the discretion of the commissioner. I think that we should have a conversation about that, about assessing the cost of having responses go to the building. So we have done instances where we have parked and stationed a vehicle with flashing lights outside of a problem property to, I guess that would be more of like a public shaming, but it's also a security measure since there's constant partying. We have some drug houses, we have some prostitution houses. So we'll park a police car in front of the building and we will charge that property owner the cost of having, whether it's a sergeant or a captain or whoever is sitting in that car, the cost associated with them being at that site. We then will assess that cost and put a lien onto the property. So those are the 2 tools that we have as the task force that we can leverage against the property. But the obstacles that we get are, one is the notification to the property owner. We have to legally notice them, and how we can do a better job of how can we make it easier for us to notice an individual? Because certified mail, I think when the ordinance was passed, was probably smart back then. It's not smart now because there's ways for property owners to get around certified mail, knowing that if they don't accept that letter, they're not deemed a problem property. And then just thinking about afterwards how we're assessing the fines and fees on the problem property, I think are 2 conversations that we could have. Afterwards, we just had a meeting today with a problem property. The new owner came in, showed us all the code violations are being cleared up. They pulled permits. All the other issues have been addressed. They paid all the back fines. We will then issue them a letter saying, thank you very much for taking care of your property and bringing it back up to standard. You are now on probation for 6 months. So if that property should get any 911 calls or other violations within that 6 months, they automatically go back onto the problem property task force. We will summon them and start it all over again with the leveraging of the fines. But by the time that an individual has come and sat with us and worked through all the issues, I think we've had one property maybe in like a 4-year span go back on the list. It's not a regular occurrence. But again, we would be open to any sort of recommendations about that process.
This is helpful. I mean, clean it and lean it, I would love to revisit that conversation. I've heard good things, and particularly if there's any data around what vacancy looked like before versus after with the intervention of this program, how else it might be used, what funding would be needed to sort of bring it back online. I mean, Chief Dillon, we're talking about so much, but of course it requires resources and human capital. Go ahead, I feel like you have to.
No, I think it is a good program. We have talked about bringing it back, and I'm sort of making this up, I think, but I think the amount we would need to start the program isn't huge, right? Oftentimes it's cleaning up a front yard or boarding an unsafe front door, or that kind of thing, which isn't. And we do have the infrastructure because we have a property management unit, so we do have the infrastructure for it. So I think we should all have a conversation and see, how we might resurrect that.
And it's been helpful because we send ISD out and they just board up to the first floor, and it stops, because what happens in a lot of some of these properties in some of the neighborhoods, you just get these squatters. And then you keep calling about it, and then you find out that no one's legally a tenant of the building. They've just kind of taken the building over, and the property manager is just nowhere around. And so I think that Sheila and I talked, we believe that it's small money, especially since we're putting a lien on the property to pay for the cost. I think we just have to have a conversation with the council about what that number is.
Do you have a range of what that number might be?
I think we can look into that.
Okay. And then lastly, and then I'll turn over to, back to the chair. On the problem property task force, is it possible to change some certified mail in the ordinance to some other techniques, or does it get a little bit more complicated? So is it a matter of us just saying certified mail or some form of mail to these folks who are namely outside of Massachusetts, and there are, I think, a lot of them, is adequate if it is received, or if we send it 3 times or 5 times, so that the owner, the onus isn't on us, or are there other things, other legal challenges that you run into in changing the form of process required to serve these folks?
I think we rely on the certified mail because it's a legal notice, and we're going to use that potentially to attach liens onto a property. So we have to work within that, what's considered appropriate in court as far as legal notice goes. We can certainly try additional methods of notice in addition to certified mail, like we're using constables to serve notices, but we operate as if an appeal may be rendered through the court process, and so we have to be sure that we've notified them appropriately and up to the standards of court. So
whatever the forms of process are, this is bringing back to my day when I was a paralegal. It was like running across all of New York City to serve people.
So you can see
every skill set is valuable.
You can see my frustration as the chair when I look at everybody. I was like, why can't we just do this? And they're like, no. They have to have it officially put in their hand. And this is the lawyers telling me, no, you can't just put them on.
Right. But if we have to require someone in other states, for example, to serve process, how might we put the cost of doing that on the owner once they receive it on the property or something? But happy to work in figuring that out. I mean, obviously there's a legal question in there too about what's adequate and sufficient, what isn't. And of course it's going to cost us money, but we shouldn't have to bear that in trying to track someone down to do the right thing. And then the post-listing piece, I do think we need to continue to brainstorm. I don't have all the answers on that enforcement piece. Because for some of these properties, I'm like $300, go max, go all the way, because it's ridiculous what we hear in terms of the stories related to some of these problem properties once they get on the list. And, the last thing we want to do is just be obviously assessing fines, but then nothing actually changes for the residents on the ground. So what else might we be able to do to strengthen in the enforcement piece, or the impact that this has, so that folks on the ground can feel something shift? And I don't have all the answers to that, but really would love to hear more on what that could be.
So there's one property that I think the task force was very happy about us using all the tools available to us, and that was Waldeck Street. I think that might be your district, right? We had an individual who the building was predominantly individuals who were mentally disabled, BPH, Boston Public Health Commission individuals, plus BHA housing. the landlord was going and removing windows and putting up plastic in the middle of the winter, telling them that he was going to repair the windows and then never coming back. There was just a constant state of disrepair that these tenants were living in, and they were vulnerable and did not know how to speak out until we caught wind of it. And we were able to use all the tools, and we went at receivership. We absolutely, so at the end all be all, we do have the opportunity for the city to make an effort to take a building and put it into receivership. We always view that as the last resort to take property from a property owner. But I forgot to mention that we can avail ourselves to going after a property to put it in receivership. We did do that on Waldeck. We got a good operator in there. They cleaned up the building, and the building is a much better space than it was. So we do have some good success stories. Another thing that I want to note for you, Madam President, as you're thinking through these, is our ability to look at who owns the property. And I think that every councilor probably has the same frustration when we go to assessing, but assessing by its own processes is not always up to date as of right now who owns that property. So the Problem Property Task Force will deem a problem property, and then we will mail the current owner that we have on the assessing list. Now, there are other agencies who have different lists, such as Boston Water and Sewer with the water
right.
bills and other places. But if you look at the ordinance, I'm not allowed to use that information. I am, by ordinance, focused on the assessing list. And so I think that should you have any conversations about any sort of change to the ordinance, I would like for you to keep that in the back of your mind, that the ability for the task force to grab data from any sort of data set is key, because right now we seem to be hamstrung with the certified mail and the assessing list only.
And
I
we
think
sometimes go to the
and you guys
water
call
and
us and we
sewer
say, and what
to
happened
see.
is I think one time
Yeah.
your chief of staff was great. We sent a letter out and she called back right away and said, Jerome, that's not the owner of the building. And if we didn't get that information back from your office, because then we sent the letter out to the right owner, but we didn't know. We just went to assessing and had the database hadn't been updated yet, so we were mailing a person that would have went to a lost mailbox, and we would have kept mailing that person until your staff said, no, we found the new address, and then we sent it right away to the new owner.
which are small changes that we can make. And receivership, I'm like, take the property, do what you need to do, because it really is extreme
Yep.
cases when we're actually pushing for the property to be on the Problem Properties Task Force in the first place.
Yep.
And it's a property that we know at some point in time will end up with some horrific public safety incident happening. We've seen that. So it's good to know that, to be reminded, actually, because Waldeck, we followed that, of
Yep.
course, that case.
And Park Street in your district was a little different because the feds came in, and
That's right.
at that point we get pushed to the back because they were like, no, we're taking the property. But I think that the council should use the ability of receivership when they have a significant problem in their district. They should be pressing us to go down that avenue.
Well, we will. We hope that you guys will say yes every time we ask, but I now want to turn it over. I don't want to take up too much time. I can go back to another round. Thank you. Thank you.
Councilor O'Malley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for those lines of great questions to my colleague, the council president. The city of Cambridge I don't know if it's yet been adopted or enacted, but they worked on a vacancy ordinance and came up in typical Cambridge fashion with this very extensive org chart, but it's actually a helpful one, and I'll make sure we get a copy to the chair. And it asks the question, why is the space vacant? How will the ordinance define vacancy? How long before registration is required? Penalty structure for violations, how must it be maintained, what does activation look like? And I think that's something that we've talked about. I know there was a great example of a wonderful substation, not in my district, in Councilor McCarthy's district, District 5 in Rosendale Square. I know that all of you know it well. We had hoped that it was going to be a restaurant. As we all know, it's one of the most precarious business models. It didn't work out, but it was a temporary beer hall, and it's now a local brewer is moving in from Jamaica Plain. And it's been a terrific addition to the neighborhood. And it was actually a great example. And Aaliyah, the Main Streets director, deserves tremendous credit in her board that they helped sort of activate that. So I guess I'm going to focus mostly on commercial in this line of questioning. What's sort of the general thoughts on a vacancy fee, or some cudgel to try to bring some of these folks into sort of compliance? And again, I'm not looking to be overly onerous to business owners. Market demand is going to play a role in certain neighborhoods and in certain areas, but you know, you look at Faneuil Hall or Quincy Market, the number of vacancies there, Newbury Street, these places that have really active, successful, expensive, valuable real estate seem to have longer periods. So has there been any talk, other than my conversations with Chief Barros, on sort of the vacancy fee, or any opinion? As a concept, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, you know, as a concept, or, no? Okay.
If you have suggestions or something.
Sure. So I can tell you, I have talked to Chief Barros about it. I think it's something that we ought to consider. And again, we can use it any way we want to use it. Arlington has used it to great success. I think they look at about $300 or $400 a year, and they've seen their it's 600.
I think when they were here testifying, Counselor, it was 600.
Okay, yeah, which is a lot of money, but it's not going to bankrupt somebody. And again, they've seen vacancies, commercial vacancies drop by 60%. And it's not to suggest that you can compare the town of Arlington with the city of Boston, but you could compare the town of Arlington with the neighborhood of Jamaica Plain or West Roxbury. It's about 40,000 people or so. So I think that as we go forward, I'd love to continue this conversation, because I don't think we should take it off the table. Again, there could be a waiver requirement if a landlord were making a good faith effort to engage that space some way or another. It could be a neighborhood pop-up art gallery working with a local school. So I am hopeful that as we continue, we look at that. Also, can you talk do we have any idea how many residential units are vacant? Not necessarily sort of the problem properties or the overgrown, which is obviously a concern, but I'm talking about, you know, there've been media articles about, you know, high-end residences that are tax shelters. Do we know, I guess the only way you'd know that is to sort of make a guess with the property tax exemption, residential exemption.
We don't have good data on what's vacant.
Yeah.
We sometimes can glean a vacancy rate from surveys, an overall vacancy rate, but we don't have good data on vacancies. I wish we did.
Yeah.
We know that, you know, earlier in the Airbnb process, how many units were listed on Airbnb, that kind of thing. Vancouver, that is a city, as you know, that is looking at a vacancy fee or tax. They worked for years trying to figure out, okay, who is it? We know you're out there, but who are you? And in the end, they kind of threw up their hands, and now they have people sign these affidavits, which seems, you know, I'm, you know, against penalties and perjury. I'm not, you know, I don't have a vacant unit. So that seems odd too. So short answer, no. There's no data out there that says I am living in as an owner-occupant or I am renting.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist.
I actually spent some time in Vancouver last fall with several colleagues, happened to meet with the CFO, asked her about this very issue, and she said, I mean, as red hot as the Boston real estate market is, we've talked about this, Chief, in Vancouver, the average house price is $1.3 million. That's the average. That's well more than double at Boston. She had mentioned that there are a lot of single-family homes that fell into this, so they literally be doing drive-bys, see if there were no lights on. So it's not a perfect science, but she did mention ways to look at, I mean, the utilities would all be activated, but voter registration, obviously property tax exemption. So it's a hard thing. We're never going to get a great answer. But I wonder, could we start with like a voluntary registration program?
I can certainly look into it. I know that, you know, ISD makes people that are renting out their units register.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd have to, you know, I have to go back and ask ISD. I don't know if they collect, is your unit occupied?
Yeah.
We can certainly look into that. Yeah, but even when my understanding is even when Vancouver started to look at, tried to work with the utility companies to say, okay, are you showing any electricity usage, or that utility companies were not cooperating. So I don't mind looking at what other cities are doing. I can do that with your office and see if there's a good way of determining this. You know, I walk around at night with the dog, and I'm sort of peering into buildings too, trying to figure out, you know, are things sitting vacant? It's
Thank you, Chief.
right, knocking on doors. But right now, I can't think of a good mechanism to getting at that question.
Yeah.
I do think though, short-term rentals, it's going to be when that's, you know, up and running, and the great win that the city had with Airbnb and those units come back online, we're going to see a lot less vacant units.
Good.
Because it's tough. Like, we hear a lot from, like, the ink block area in the south end. Like, we just hear from residents in the building talking about lonely hallways where they don't even know if they have another neighbor on their floor. And so it's all anecdotal, that stuff that we hear, and then we do the Inspector Clouseau stuff that Sheila's doing where she's out with a flashlight. But I think that it does cause for a greater conversation, because now we're in this whole executive suites conversation. It seems like this whole apartment sharing industry is finding new ways to get this in there. And we're finding like 15 units being rented out in buildings. And so I think that we do need to put our hats on, because the residents are asking this from us.
Yeah.
And yet we haven't found a sound strategy about how we actually know what's open, what's not.
Well, I think it sort of underscores the size and the scope of this problem, the difficulty in trying to solve it, the fact that you've got folks that both will let a property fall into utter disrepair in West Roxbury and then have a beautiful, expensive penthouse condo in the South Huntington corridor that remains empty, not even a Airbnb or a home share, just because it's whatever they paid for it, the property value is going to go up. It's less volatile than the stock market, the real estate market, certainly in Boston. So there's a lot of good things I think we can do, and I think that this has been a great partnership. I really appreciate the leadership you all have shown. Hope that we can continue. I mean, it would probably be unlikely. I would be my desire to have some sort of a better codified ordinance, but I certainly think we have a lot of work to do before we even get there. But I think a registration component has to be key. And this is both for commercial and residential. I think a fee is something that we can, that ought to be part of this, with the discretion, and it could be the chief, it could be, anyone would have that discretion to offer a waiver for someone and have a very low threshold of what it would take to show that you were trying to. There's a person, many of us know, a very successful landlord in Jamaica Plain, who tells me how he markets his properties, and yet they've been empty for decades in many cases. So it's a huge issue, but I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say, I do have a fairly extensive network of housing directors from other high-cost cities, and I just made myself a note to put out a blast to see if any other major city is doing. I only know Vancouver,
Yeah.
but if any other major U.S. city is actually tracking vacant units. So
Yeah.
I'll report back when I hear.
Great. And then the final thing, and this wouldn't necessarily be part of an ordinance, but as we talk about the temporary activation, what does that look like? Is it difficult? In other words, if Councillor Flynn owned a beautiful spot in, Center Street in West Roxbury, and I had a bunch of kids from all the schools that wanted to do a temporary art gallery that would, raise money for the school, would it be difficult for us to go through that? Would there be some permitting that we'd need to do? The answer is yes, of course, and there should be. I'm not saying have it as a free-for-all, but could we make it easier for a landlord to work with a neighborhood group or nonprofit to sort of activate that, even if it's for a night? Okay, that is all I have for this round. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Do we want to go through? Yeah. At this time, I'd like to ask Council President if we'd do another round of questioning.
Yeah, I'll be quick, 'cause I know we have folks who want to speak on panel 2 who are doing some work in this space. But just wanted to go on record with Councilor O'Malley, when the vacancy fee, and some people use different terms, came up, particularly with Arlington, and they came to that first hearing last year to talk about how it's working for them. Other cities are also using sort of these fees in different ways, different structures, through taxes, higher taxes for vacant lots, or other ways to incentivize folks to step it up. I think it's a good thing, and I think we absolutely have to explore it, especially for privately owned, both commercial and residential. I think, the resources that we get from that could be used, one, by us as a municipality to deal with all that comes at us when we have to deal with these lots and the calls that we get, sending ISD out there, sometimes off hours, to deal with some of the craziness that is happening on some of these properties or sites. The resources, of course, could also be used possibly to think about some creative partnerships. In the next panel, there's an organization, Spacious, was here at the first one, that activates commercial spaces, and they will talk about what they're doing. But you think about some organizations that are taking some vacant lots now and doing some short-term activation to really serve a community purpose, and not just in the sense of what you might typically think, which is a green space or art, but really for something even more substantive. And, you know, how might some of these resources be used for that while other folks sort of get it together, while the privately owned landowners get it together. So I think that absolutely needs to, I think, be a part of the conversation. And when we were in my office looking at, you know, Washington, D.C., Philly, and some other places, the scale, of course, is different, but there is still some financial incentives to get folks to activate their spaces. Some do tax abatements or, you know, there's different ways of doing it, but it's getting at the money, which we all know suddenly, sometimes that helps. And then, of course, receivership, you know, the Attorney General has a similar program at the state level for abandoned properties, sort of taking those and doing something with them. We have our own here, but how might we actually use that tool not just for problem properties, for other properties that are just standing, that are offline, I should say, for a really long time? What might we be able to do for those properties as well? Because there is a lot of them and we don't have quite the data just yet to capture it. But I do think they should be on the table and it should be a part of any sort of package or ordinance, even with some of the changes we're thinking about with the problem properties existing ordinance as we move forward. So we'll look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you, guys. And if you have time, you know, there's panelists for panel number 2 should be great as well. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Council President. And I just wanted to follow up with one comment or question. I have a piece of property in South Boston on the corner of F Street and N Street. And it's, as we referenced earlier during the question and answering, it's an Airbnb, and there's an elderly woman, Mrs. Rush, who lives next to it, next to the property, and it's not on the problem property list, but it's a huge problem in my neighborhood with ongoing parties and quality of life issues, noise. What are we going to do as it relates to short-term and long-term on problems that we're having with Airbnb right now? It's a major problem in my district. I know it is throughout the city. We're getting a lot of calls about it. What will the city do on problem properties we have with Airbnb?
I would say ISD is actively issuing violation notices to operators of short-term rentals that are either not registered with the city or ineligible to be used as short-term rentals. So their focus has been leading up over the summer notice and asking people to register. Once we find that people have not registered, fines up to $300 per day per violation can be issued to the property owners, and ISD is actively doing that.
Could you send us the address, the exact address, Counselor, if you have it, or have your constituents send it to us?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Chief. And I have been working with ISD on this. And it is a huge problem for one of my constituents that has to deal with this piece of property every weekend, where we're having loud parties and noise and quality of life issues, trash. But I will get that to you. At this time, Council.
Sorry, one more. Sorry, I have one more. You know, speaking of registration, and so we have obviously the foreclosure, which came up, ordinance that came online, and there's a registration right now where you can go online and have properties that are foreclosed, and not even vacant. So I have a couple in Codman Square. There was a fire at one location. It's now sitting there for 2 years, but it's on there even though it's not foreclosed. So there clearly is this tool of registration that already exists based on the ordinance filed before I got here.
Right.
And so the question is, how might we expand the value of that to be used for some enforcement purposes? Right now, it's more as an inventory.
Right.
But I don't know that we go back in to say, okay, what are we doing in terms of enforcement to get these folks off that inventory and activated for some community purpose?
Right.
But I wanted to flag that too, because it's another tool in the toolbox.
Right. My understanding, so if it was a foreclosed property, the bank or the owner of the foreclosed property had to register, and they had to put a real contact on the door, because remember in 2009, 2010, there were so many foreclosures. So I haven't thought about that registry in a while, so you're saying, can that be expanded to have other uses besides foreclosures? Because foreclosures are pretty low right now, yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like there are, I've put in some random addresses from my district that aren't foreclosed, at least I don't think they are, and they're listed. So I don't know how they got on there. They might just, I think they're just still vacant, but they're not necessarily a foreclosed property. So clearly we're using it to gather some, I think, non-foreclosed properties, even though we're required to, but how might we expand that? And how does it show, how does this database that we currently have show up beyond just as an inventory, but allow us to go in and to track or to enforce or to incentivize folks on this list to actually do something? So one of the properties, for example, that I don't think is in foreclosure, that's in my district, 2 years it's just been sitting there, and we're kind of like, what are you doing? We know about it, it's in our registration inventory, but how might we go in and say, we really have to go in and figure out what we're going to do
And it
here?
could be in probate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So just wanted
So
to flag
it does
that.
seem like there's a next generation of work beyond information, so. Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Council President. Councilor O'Malley, one more bite of the apple?
Happily defer my time till after the next panel.
Well, on behalf of my colleagues, I want to say thank you to the administration staff that testified this afternoon, Sheila Dillon, Andrew Grace, Chris English, and Jerome Smith. I'd like to conclude this part of the hearing, and we'll go on to our second panel. Again, thank you for your leadership on this issue. At this time, could we call down the second panel, including Monique Fuchs from Wentworth Institute of Technology and Stephanie Lee, CEO of Spacus? Hi. Good. Yeah. Good afternoon, and for the record, would you like to introduce yourself and your name and your title and organization, please?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Oh, my name is Stephanie Lee, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of SpaceUs.
My name is Monique Fuchs, and I'm Associate Vice President for Innovation Entrepreneurship with Wentworth Institute of Technology.
Thank you very much for being here, for coming to this hearing. Would you like to provide an opening statement?
Well, I would like to thank you and thank the councilors and the Madam President for giving us the opportunity to actually talk about the collaboration we had with the City Lab Reclaiming Spaces in March. And I'm excited to be able to shed some light on how academia and industry and the community can work closer together.
Great. Similarly, I feel humbled to be presenting here. I was part of the audience last year, very excited to be in the conversation about vacancy and to hear how we can help cities and neighborhoods feel more vibrant. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share what we've been working on this past year and a half since the last hearing.
Well, thank you very much to both of you for being here. At this time, I'd like to ask Council President, would you like to start the Q&A?
Well, I'll just have you guys share, since that first hearing, lots have happened from your space, but we thought it's important that, when we have a public hearing like this, that people should know about the work you're doing in ways in which you're thinking about what the city could be doing going forward as well. So I'm going to just turn it over to you guys, and Monique, we can start with you on just the Reclaiming Space project, how it was received by the institution, and what you think we should be doing as a city going forward in terms of the vacancies, both commercial and residential.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I can take a quick step back and just share a little bit the background of why Wentworth has been starting to engage. So Wentworth is focused on applied sciences, and we are a very hands-on college. And we launched 2012 Accelerate, which is our Innovation Entrepreneurship Center. And so one of the goals of Accelerate is to build innovative thinking and entrepreneurial confidence, which usually shows up in our students as, focusing on competencies like risk-taking and resiliency and adaptability. But also at the core is really pushing interdisciplinary interactions. And that means, going out into the communities, talking with industry, and trying to get outside of their discipline of study, really recognizing that ideas can come from anywhere. We are focused a lot on external engagement and internal engagement. So not only do we want students talking with students and faculty, but actually also going out and creating real impact in the communities. And so that's something we've been really pushing, and our students are very interested in solving real world issues. We have been establishing think tank formats, which is like a one-day event where we are curating typically about 50 to 60 participants come together from all sorts of different disciplines, industry, community, and academia, and tackle any of the challenges. So when we partnered with Andrea's office as well as with the Dutch consulate and our architecture offices at Wentworth, we really wanted to figure out how can we create ideas around abandoned properties and abandoned lots. And so when we started the collaboration, it was a quite energetic endeavor because many of the community leaders that were actually present provided so much more insight into the neighborhoods. It was very impactful for the students to see, what ideas could be generated and would actually impact their day-to-day life. So I think that was really critical. And that created a lot of excitement. And so while those ideas generated out of the day were really vibrant and valuable, we wanted to take it a step further. And so what we did is we created one of those booklets. That's kind of like a working book. It lists like all the properties that were identified, and not all of them were taken by teams. So we wanted to give this opportunity for the community to take this field book and actually take it with them and continue the ideation well beyond that one-day event. We also took some of those ideas and actually plopped them into a summer semester where one of our professors, Michael Musil, was teaching a capstone business management class, and some of the teams started to actually take a community kitchen approach as well as an e-gaming youth development center and carried it forward into a feasibility study. And I think that's a great opportunity for students to be able to provide additional resources and insights on who we could partner with potentially, right? Who the community might be looking into, like what are some of the funding mechanisms and what kind of roadblocks are in the way. So I think it was useful from that perspective. What is also impactful when these immersions are coming together, even if it is just for one day, it's really the fact that there is a lot of byproduct created out of it as well. So when we were starting the conversations, we realized that we have a summer fab program in architecture, which usually happens over the summer. High school students are coming together and creating building structures. And folks in the think tank, in the City Lab, Dean Hotchkiss, C.J. Belarus, and Dave Merera got together and took some of those structures that were built and actually planted them on the Neponset Riverway, which is a fantastic opportunity to activate the community and start conversations around how do you change the way how the community is starting to engage some of those new pop-ups. What actually just recently happened as well, one of the faculty members, John Ellis from architecture, was part of the City Lab. And actually they created this idea about the design collective in the neighborhoods where you would run an urban studio actually in the community. And we didn't advance that idea over the summer, but just recently I met with Taylor Kane, who is the new director for the iLab in housing in the mayor's office. And so they connected, and they're going to start a process in spring with the studio in architecture to kind of look closer into that. So there is so much byproduct that can emerge as a result of these kind of collaborations. And we have a new president, President Mark Thompson, and he is very committed to the Boston community and seeing some social impact. And I think that's a great opportunity for us to figure out how we can come closer together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow, tough to follow. It was great to hear about all that you're doing at Wentworth. We've actually worked with some Wentworth students, so it's great to see sort of the energy live through the students as well, or throughout the institution. My name is Stephanie, as mentioned, and I am one of the founders of Space Us, which is a social enterprise that activates and and keeps exciting vacant and underutilized spaces. We basically turn them into places for people to come together to really gather outside of the institutions, the corporate campuses, the neighborhood groups that seem to keep us within a specific area. And we create this third space for people to come together throughout the city to collaborate. So we essentially transform these spaces into sites for pop-up retail experiences, cultural programming, and more, freeing up the landlords to also search for long-term tenants, so we keep these spaces active in the meanwhile. My co-founder and I started Space Us during graduate school. We were both studying architecture, and she was studying also city planning at MIT, and we were really frustrated by the vacant storefronts that we saw sort of appearing every day. On our walks to school, we would see these signs of life disappear. Stores that were anchors in our community would be replaced with for lease signs, which would linger for a few days, then weeks, months, and sort of the 3.5 years that we were in graduate school. So starting Space Us was incredibly personal for us because we felt the impact of vacant spaces on our neighborhood. We believed we lived in a neighborhood that was vibrant, that was thriving, and if you look at our homes, like geographically, all signs would indicate to that. But these for lease signs for us, whether or not this was true, they were active indicators of neglect. So we thought we were in just like a forgotten part of Cambridge. So since creating Space Us and starting our operations in summer 2018, we've organized 5 pop-ups transforming these vacant spaces in high traffic areas, as well as medium traffic areas, and essentially turning them into something else. We've also organized 2 activations of underutilized common space. So most recently we were at Hub Week, where we were part of this larger activation of a vacant lot in the Seaport that I think the developer is actively seeking to program. And through our efforts, we've brought together various neighborhoods like Harvard Square, the Seaport, Roslindale, bringing together people all around the mission of nurturing local creativity and the entrepreneurial spirit. We've brought to life over 200 separate programs, everything from events, workshops, exhibitions, retail pop-ups, and more, realized dozens of ambitious cultural projects, and brought together tens of thousands of people using these vacant storefronts as a starting place to begin to gather. I would say we work at the intersection of many interests. We collaborate with the city's organizations and are grateful to BIDS and Main Streets who have helped us navigate the confusing process of licensing and permitting. We daily collaborate with residents, neighbors, creatives, new entrepreneurs, landlords, developers. We engage all the voices because we want to create and believe we are creating a win-win-win scenario where everyone benefits from interim use. There are some obstacles that we've run into during our 1.5 years of operating, and just as a beginning point, we have some initial recommendations that we thought could be helpful in making activity and interim use more or less challenging. The first is, I think defining vacancy is like the thing we are always pointing to. We mentioned Vancouver. Vancouver defines a vacant property as one that's been unoccupied for 180 days. Here, vacancy data is self-reported by landlords and collected by a company that is incentivized to paint a more optimistic picture. I think during our attempts to activate vacant properties, we saw that there were many ways of evading the designation of vacant, perhaps construction, perhaps LOIs. There are lots of ways to get around having a space that's vacant and getting away from that designation, and so just defining it would be incredibly helpful as a starting point. The 2 other recommendations are more about how to make temporary use easier so that more and more new entrepreneurs can begin using them as spaces to really build what they aspire to build. So the first is to create a one-stop shop on the Licensing Commission website to streamline licensing and permitting. This was actually a solution that we recommended while we were members on the Cambridge Arts Task Force, and it's one that we believe would alleviate a lot of the confusion around the paperwork required to open and operate a pop-up. We leaned in very heavily to the experiences and relationships of the bids and main streets that we worked with. We realize that's like an incredible privilege and not everyone has that. And so to make this information more transparent would make it possible for more people to take advantage of these opportunities. And then next, it would be incredible if code could be crafted or amended to encourage pop-ups. Something that we often talk to developers about are whether or not we can use space that is brand new, doesn't quite have its COO, but other than that is like very able to take in temporary use. And currently we're not able to take those on because it's just so difficult to obtain these certificates. I would say another thing that would be incredibly helpful are temporary but longer than 1 day event and liquor licenses. These are things that we've seen our friends get around by having, I guess, like pulling 30 consecutive separate licenses for things to facilitate a 1 month pop-up, but having something that could speak to the way that business is actually being done would be incredibly helpful. I think we see that there are cities like Austin, Norfolk, and Chicago who are developing these ordinances to encourage pop-ups, to reduce vacancy and reflect really how people are shopping and how people are living in neighborhoods now. And we're hopeful that our city will begin developing these codes to encourage activity and reduce vacancy. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Monique, and thank you, Stephanie. Councilor O'Malley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for your great work and partnership. And you touched upon many of the questions I have, but I guess I'd want to sort of maybe delve a little bit deeper. Monique, you know, Wentworth's done some great work with City Lab on studies. Could you point to, through your research, a city that really is sort of doing this the right way that Boston should emulate as we sort of talk about next steps and working sessions and potential ordinances down the road?
I think it's difficult to point to a right way. You know, sometimes
Fair
it's also
point.
done.
I'll strike the word right. Interesting things happening in other cities that perhaps we could emulate.
I mean, I do believe that when we worked with the Dutch, it was quite interesting to see how private partnerships could actually come together with governmental organizations and create a focus and just create, you know, goals and then just go after it. I think there is a lot of opportunity in just simply having the dialogue and being able to identify what should happen within the next year, for example. We had a follow-up event with the Dutch consulate around climate resiliency, and that was interesting because we brought many of our thought leaders in Boston together, and these are things that we could tackle, you know, going forward, and bringing academia in as partners. And you mentioned before was Northeastern and BU. We should become much more agnostic to those organizations, right? We should be able to actually cast a broad net of collaborators, and I think there is enough work to be done across the board that we have enough space for individual organizations to take specific slices of that. And so it's a dialogue. It's just coming together and just actually understanding and knowing what one organization is worrying about and how they can plug in to maximize each capabilities.
Have you, through your research, noticed if a fee has been a better tool? Is the threat of financial harm, for lack of a better word, a useful way to sort of activate some of these spaces? Is the amount not enough to make it work? I'm just curious of your take on the question I asked the earlier panel on assessing a fee for long-term vacancies.
Yeah, I haven't done any research on that. I'm not an expert on vacant properties.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I'm an organizational developer by training, and so for me, it's more about how can we actually bring people together and create synergies and get the ideation on the way, and who are the players in the system that would actually enable action. I think that's more the piece. We have actually done a college think tank years ago with the former administration in 2013 or so, and it was about vacant storefronts as well in the city. And one app came out of that as a communication tool among the different stakeholders, like landlords, residents, the community at large. And I do think, if I look in my neighborhood, I do think there is just simply a lack of communication and what the community envisions the community to be. Mm-hmm. And I think you can't really solve that from the outside. It really has to come from the inside. Yeah.
Be organic. It's another reason why I think that the council can continue to play a role as we go forward, because we've got sort of the inherent understanding and can be as ecumenical, to use your word, as possible. Thank you for that. Stephanie, you talked a little bit about sort of, I won't put words in your mouth, but the frustration many, particularly in the artist community, have with navigating City Hall, even if indeed there is a place to, showcase some work, you still have to go through, a fairly lengthy process. Are there ways that we can better do that? Sort of an expedite, other than just sort of we could expedite the permit process, but are there any suggestions you may have or some of your colleagues may have had of ways that we could partner with through either the Cultural Council or other organizations to make this easier for folks?
Yeah, I would say first having the information available in one location would be an incredible resource. And I think, we do get a lot of emails, but we're just two people responding to emails. Yeah. And so having that information available would be a tremendous resource. I also think that, in addition to, I guess, these and a more sensible event licensing structure, I think, just having the information available would be a huge one.
Right. What's been your most successful pop-up that you've seen? I'm going to ask you the same question, Stephanie. So, excuse me, Monique, I'll ask you, but we'll start with Stephanie. What's been the most successful pop-up model you've seen?
I wonder what do you mean by that?
Well, in terms of a vacant space that has been transformed, even for a temporary time period, what's one that you thought that's great? That's a great use of that space. That's been a great asset for the artist to show off his or her works.
Yeah, I would say ones where everyone is very aligned with what is going to happen with the space are ones where I find that there's the most success, which is to say, sometimes we talk to landlords and they do not want to work with an organization like us because they don't want that picture to be painted where they look bad because an artist is kicked out of a space, despite the fact that maybe prior to that final day of a pop-up, there was conversation about this being a finite pop-up period. I think the ones that really take advantage of the amount of time the amount of time someone is in the space, the way that the pop-up is structured in a way that actually, in a way where everyone is very mission aligned, I find those to be the most effective pop-ups, which is to say a holiday pop-up that is centered around a specific thing. There's a finite end, there's a finite sort of start period. I would say as this ending period becomes nebulous, as conversations begin to neglect details, we find that there's a lot of failure in the pop-up as not only in actually being able to execute upon the mission, but it also ends up being this larger difficulty where people feel overall disappointed by the pop-up altogether because they find that it further exacerbates the appearance of neglect.
Sure. No, that's a fair point. Fair point. Monique, any success story that you want to cite? I had mentioned that the Rosedale substation is sort of a great example. Anything off the top of your mind before we close?
Yeah, so actually I want to feed into what Stephanie just
Please.
said because in my hometown university, I'm from Germany originally, they used student work to actually pop up over the holidays in an empty space. And it was so successful, it was totally radical at the time. It was maybe now 10 years or so ago. It was so radical at the time that the landlord was willing to just make it a thing. And so now you have regular pop-ups. Every month there is a different pop-up in that space. And it's just very intentional. It's like thematically driven. And I think it's just cool to have that outlet for the creative and the maker community to be able to have a platform where they can sell their things. And it's curated, and it's because it is thematic, you can actually prepare for it. It's almost like going to an exhibition for a museum, and that's been pretty powerful.
That's great. That's wonderful. Where in Germany is this? What city? Or
It's
what?
in Coburg.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wunderbar.
Yeah.
Danke. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. And I just had one question for Stephanie or for Monique. I always, when I drive by a vacant store, I always think of the reason why it's vacant. And I often wonder why, did we give that small business owner enough training, education, opportunity? But are we preparing small business owners with the right, are we giving them the right tools, knowing that to open up a business, it may take 8 months, and you may not have the capital to last that long? And when you finally open your store up and within a year, you might already be behind the 8 ball in terms of your finances. But and then I wonder about what impact that has on women-owned businesses, communities of color, and they don't have the right capital at the right time. What can we do on that issue?
I'm wondering if there is an opportunity for the districts, to actually facilitate communications with the community to figure out what is the vision for the district and who would they like to be. I mean, every district has a different flavor. It's just every city in this country has a different flavor and could stand for something. It could become a pride point, but it also could drive, some of the decision-making around what businesses are being taken in and which ones might not be as successful. Sometimes I feel decisions for businesses are being made because there is a passion of that entrepreneur wanting to have a frozen yogurt place. But then, they're going through all those construction costs, and a year later they're shutting the space down and someone else comes in and just redoes it all over again, and just alone the money being spent is just incredible. So I think there is an opportunity to maybe create visions of who do we want to be as a district.
I would say a lot of our work is really bridging that gap between idea to execution. I think particularly as we do the build out, we sort of take, we take one sentence submissions on something someone wants to see in their community and sort of see it from that one sentence to like an actual event, an actual pop-up, an event, or an actual activation. And I would say for us, we have developed robust checklists to make sure that everything is going to, go according to plan and that no one is breaking the bank. And so in terms of how we make sure that everyone has the tools necessary, I think having very, being able to channel younger audiences or different audiences is something we think about a lot. We've actually done some work with the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture to get the fact that they have an arts resource manager out there to a bunch of artists who need help in Boston but have no idea who they can turn to. And I would say as incredible as these resources are, there should be additional avenues of reaching diverse audiences in ways that might not seem very traditional, but are just so integrated into life now. So yeah, I would say the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture now has a great Instagram that you can interact with and has put them into the world of arts in Boston. Prior to that, they were a totally absent figure.
Right. Well, thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Monique, and sure, yeah, Council President.
Thank you both. This is extremely helpful, and even in conversations offline, I think you guys are just doing amazing work and offering up ideas. But Monique, going to your point, I think what I find challenging as a district councilor that covers 4 neighborhoods, Dorchester, which is my biggest, within Dorchester itself, the demographics, the different cultures that are represented, we're asking for folks to come out of their normal spaces of operation, out of their neighborhoods, to connect with one another and to truly create a sense of community across the entire district, to really develop that vision, and that can be very challenging. But where we do see opportunity is, at least with some of the vacant lots, is everyone is excited about the possibility of informing what can go in that lot, because we want it to be grassroots up. Not saying this is what we think we should go there. It's frankly hearing from you as a community what should go there. And so it gives us an opportunity to do that visioning work with community and residents, to generate ideas. We're actually in the process of thinking about how we design a process to get ideas for lots that currently don't have a community idea. We have some through the Wentworth process, which is great, but there's still so many lots in our phase 1 set of parcels that don't have any community ideas. So how do we engage existing civic associations or community-based organizations where folks are volunteering their time? And then how do we pull in those folks that normally do not show up for anything government-related to say it is really important that you show up as an abutter to this parcel of land, as a member of the community? But you're exactly right. It can be very challenging, but it's a wonderful opportunity and a good problem, I think, to have. So thank you both for the work you're doing, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Councilor.
Thank you, Council President. And thank you to the panelists for joining us. Your input was excellent, and thank you for testifying with us. And at this time, I would like to ask, this is a public hearing as well, so I'd like to ask Alexis Smith if you would like to come down and testify. And to the panelists, you can stay and listen, or you can, you could testify right there. That'd be great, Ms. Smith.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Alexis Smith. I've been a resident of the city of Boston for 37 years, and I've had some challenges, some difficulties with progression surrounding education, a sustainable job, and support with my son, as well as knowing how to maintain my housing without falling behind in any area, as well as, taking care of utilities and, just trying to make sure that everything is taken care of due to lack of skills and support in areas of my life. As well as my mom, I would like to speak a brief about her. She migrated here from South Carolina, and what I've learned about her, she's an amazing artist. She knows how to crochet, and she loves art and poetry. And the reason I mention that, because I have come to realize, living in the city, there aren't too many places that have poetry studios, art studios, skateboarding parks for the kids, cooking schools where families could go, the youth could go to utilize a way to interact with each other, learn how to cook, and be able to do that back at home with their families. I've also learned that a lot of families don't have structure in their homes, meaning what they will eat for the week written down on a schedule, what their bills will be for the month, what their bills would be for 6 months, what their bills would be for the end of the year, as far as car insurance, food, utilities, rent, and just really knowing how to manage their bank account, their funds, to have sustainable living, to where they wouldn't have to worry about where they're going to move to, and a lot of properties being vacant because they can't afford to pay the first and last in a security deposit, because they don't know how to manage their funds, not because they don't want to. So I been working on a system with myself and my son. I had lost him to gun violence in 2017, and I believe it's because of lack of support in these areas that I'm mentioning, as well as consistency. We were in a crisis and we needed some support, and I needed some support as a single mom, a woman who grew up with a single mother that lacked these skills and couldn't teach me these skills because she didn't know how to do them herself. So that way I could sustain my living, pay for my expenses, and be able to move my son away before I lost him to gun violence. The system that I created, I've been working on with myself, is creating a schedule for myself, buying different binders, notebooks, and journals to write down my feelings and what I'm going through, and try to eliminate what wasn't important and focus on what is important so that I can sustain and live and manage my apartments, pay for my groceries, be able to have money to travel to school and work. And it can be very challenging at times where you are worried about, like, I don't drive, fear. So I'm paying for an Uber, but I really can't afford to pay for an Uber. Buying a bus pass, well, I need to buy groceries, but I really need to get to school, because if I don't get to school to better my education, my funds won't grow for me to be able to manage my living. So, I just think a lot of family needs help with structure, with financial literacy. So I feel like it would be nice to have more places to teach financial literacy, to teach about them about banking, to teach them about the stock market and how to invest money, to generate money to help them pay for these spaces that they are opening up when they're first starting their businesses. Because I feel like a lot of them are failing because they don't really know how to maintain and sustain it after obtaining it, not because they just want to work so hard to make money to open up a storefront and then lose it within a year, like this woman had mentioned a few moments ago. Right. I just think they don't have the skills to do so as much as they really want to, because there are a lot of open spaces. That would be nice to see some, greenhouses where people can go and plant. My mom loves to plant. She loves growing plants. Like right now, she's trying to grow a pineapple in her apartment. Mm-hmm. So, it would be nice if there was a space where you can go grow plants and fruits. And there's a lot of people who come from different countries who do that. And I know they mentioned, I have a garden in the back of my home, but it would be really nice if we had a community space that we could meet up and learn and teach our kids. And that would be another way that people could save money that don't have a lot of money until they, graduate from a university or a college or training that will help them obtain more of an income to, cover all of their expenses. Right. It's very hard when you don't have those tools. To maintain something that you work so hard for so many years. And I feel, again, like a lot of people are losing what they worked hard for and put their heart into because they lack skills. I believe I could be further down the road in my life, and I believe my son would be here with me and walking together and be in a further position, a better position in our lives if there was consistency, more places to go, more things to do as a family that's very productive and positive. Besides the Boys and Girls Club, besides the YMCA, the events that are held, a few times a month through the year, they're amazing. I enjoy the times that I got to expend going, but I really didn't learn about a lot of them till after his passing. So I feel like, putting places that would help us to come together more so we can support each other more so that we are able to sustain our living, pay our bills, take care of our utilities, and keep these storefronts in our communities that people work so hard for, whether if they lived here for all their life or where they moved here. Either one, it doesn't matter to me. I would like to see them be able to stay there, sustain their space, versus losing after working so hard to obtain a place to start a business or open up a pharmacy or a dance studio or a yoga studio. I see a lot of places that have a lot of things that are geared more towards adults, and I would like to see those spaces, you know, have more places that are geared towards the youth, the young adults, young adults like myself, teenagers, to help them learn life skills, social skills, again, financial literacy, and
Well, Ms. Smith, thank you very much for
thank you.
your comments and your testimony. It was excellent.
Thank you.
I don't mean to cut you off, but
It's okay.
but we greatly appreciate your input, and you helped this hearing out tremendously with your comments. So I
Okay.
just want to say thank you for being
Thank
with
you
us.
so much. I appreciate it so
Thank-
much. Thank you
thank
for
you.
your time. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
guys.
Could I ask Leon David if you'd like to come down and testify for 1 or 2 minutes, Leon? Please.
Council President and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me have this opportunity. I want to state that as I'm taking some time to come down to testify, because I also wanted to exercise my civic duty to demonstrate my support for the use of these types of public spaces. So I'm using some personal time to be able to speak on the record regarding this at the city level, and then we'll be heading back to work. I had the fortunate opportunity to participate in many of Wentworth's think tanks. Just this past weekend was the other. It reminds me of an African proverb that states that every individual has a genius in them, and when you allow that genius to work, many things can come into fruition. And this is just what I observed with Wentworth's think tanks. And to Councillor O'Malley's question of examples of where this has worked best, I think that Boston can be the example. Instead of looking to emulate what may already exist, that I think we can be the example for other places. We are already the Mecca for education and for healthcare, and I think it's an opportunity for us to become a Mecca in creativity when we're looking at economic entrepreneurship opportunities. The other thing I'm reminded of is the Boston Globe article that had reported that the value, the personal wealth of the median wealth of the Black community is at $8 an individual. This is a perfect opportunity for the city of Boston to hyper-catalyze the creation of wealth by bringing all sorts of people and sectors, age, experience together to create new opportunities. And a way to even include that slumlord, if you will, who is never present, looking at opportunities for the triple win or even the quadruple win, profit sharing even. How do you engage someone who's not responsive, if not to invite them an opportunity to make wealth, which is what they're in there, but making wealth with the community, wealth that is solving issues that the community identifies. And the other key point I want to point out, the ability to do this requires a great talent in facilitation. I attend enough meetings where I see it's a repeated cycle of deficit narratives and legacy personalities, legacy entities that seem to drive the narrative. And when new voices come up, they are often squashed down. And the way that Wentworth facilitates this conversation makes the space for all voices to be heard, and in that process creates something radical, something incredible as well. So having this be more possible, more commonplace, will be a great decision on the part of the city of Boston, and add one more reason that we could say we are a Mecca to the world.
Leon, thank you very much. Also, I'd also like to recognize that City Council Lydia Edwards is with us as well. There's one other name that's here, is Joy Gary. Hi, Joy.
Hello there, thank you. Thank you, Council, for hearing me. My name is Joy Gary. I am a resident of Mattapan and a lifelong resident of Boston. Grew up in Dorchester, have lived and worked in the community for a number of years, and I'm really excited to see that the city is dedicated to making use of the vacant spaces that have been blighting the community for a number of decades. And I just think that this is a unique opportunity for the rebuilding of the Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan neighborhoods, and to build it in a way that is more regenerative, sustainable, and equitable. And instead of looking at filling the vacancies with single-use properties or single-use projects, coming together and utilizing the properties in a multi-use fashion is mainly what I came here to suggest. I think a lot of times there's competing responsibilities and issues that are happening in the community, but it doesn't just have to be housing or a community garden or farming or businesses. There are ways of methods of designing that allows us to look at all of the different things that we're needing and stacking those functions. So permaculture design is actually one major design practice that has been utilized to look at a piece of property and to see how it's best utilized and where people can actually live on it, and that you're stacking the functions of what you're getting out of it, and that it's being sustainable both for the land, for the people who are there, and for the environment at large. I think I also just want to challenge the city to allow community groups and residents and business leaders to be a part of that development process. I was really excited to hear about the work that you're doing with Wentworth. It seems like it's right along the lines of really what I was hoping would be happening with the city, and just like redeveloping properties. And I just also want to mention some other groups that would be good to involve in that process. The Boston Food Forest Coalition, COG Design, Resilience Hub, which isn't a local organization, but it is a regional organization that has expertise in the areas of redesigning properties, and just also just recognizing that some of the community needs are not just physical needs. There's a lot of intangible needs of being able to walk in or live in a space that doesn't feel oppressive, and how we design these spaces. I think that we should be thinking about them not individually, but just collectively as a space. And then also just to sort of address the issue of small businesses not feeling like they have the tools to be viable. I think one way that we can address businesses going down in their first year is thinking about cooperative businesses and having spaces to be utilized by multiple businesses at the same time, instead of just one business trying to struggle on their own. I think that there is that we need to change the narrative and language around how businesses can work together and function together. Like there's a number of restaurants, for instance, that are struggling. They may be there for 10 years, but they're struggling in reducing their hours and having hours of space during the day that is being underutilized or unutilized at all. And so it becomes a waste of space when we're not actually utilizing property to its maximum. And so I just wanted to encourage different ways of designing and different ways of thinking about business models, and encouraging the community to be involved in that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. And I'd like to ask Council President Campbell if you'd like to offer closing remarks.
No, just thank you to the folks who offered public testimony and pulled out various ideas of how we can use these spaces for physical purposes, financial planning, youth, all the other pieces as well. Really appreciate it, and you guys taking the time to show up today in the middle of the afternoon. Thank you guys very much, and thank you, Councilor Flynn, and thank you, Councilor Edwards, for co-chairing, and thank you, Councilor O'Malley, for the partnership.
Councilor O'Malley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Council President, for your great leadership and partnership on this. We've been working on it for a number of years, but I think the really worthwhile testimony we heard today from the experts, from the administration, from members of the public showed how important and complex an issue this is, but there's also a real opportunity for this city to lead. And I appreciate it, particularly the comments raised by several during public testimony about the intersectionality between vacancy, activation, housing, business, and sustainability in the environment. There's a lot of good that we can do. There's a lot of space to lead on this, and again, for folks watching or those here, our legislative calendar ends in a number of months, but look forward to working with you in this next year and all of our colleagues, and maybe looking at an ordinance down the line to address not only data collection and strategies to solve these issues, but also incentives, both a carrot and a stick approach. So continued partnership shall commence, and just grateful for everyone in their time. It's been about 2 hours, slightly less than the last time we did this, but again, it shows what an important and issue this is, and delighted to have the opportunity to work on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Edwards? I want to say thank you to Council President Campbell, Councilor O'Malley, and Co-Chair Councilor Edwards for your tremendous leadership on this important issue. I'd like to thank the administration for working closely with our colleagues in the City Council for testifying today. I'd like to thank our experts that participated in this hearing, and I'd like to thank especially the testimony from the public. You provided excellent testimony and input on this important hearing, so we want to say thank you. Thank you to you. I want to thank Shane from Central Staff and the Central Staff team for excellent work this afternoon as well. Docket number 0583 and docket number 0316 is now over. Thank you.
Thank you.